My name is Matt Sargent, the creator of Haraka, and I'm going to give you a short setup guide to Haraka and guide you through creating a simple plugin. I'm going to assume that you already have Node and npm installed. If not, you can visit these URLs and install from there. To get started, we simply install Haraka from npm. I need to be root to do this, so I'm going to use sudo npm -g for global install Haraka. This command fetches Haraka from the internet and all of its dependencies. After this, we now have access to the Haraka command line. If we type Haraka, it shows us some help about what options are available to us. We're now going to create a new instance of Haraka. To do this, we pass the -i or install flag and a path in which to install it to. For the purposes of this demo, I'm going to install in/tmp/Haraka demo. For a live installation, you probably want to install in user local share or /etc or somewhere in the system path. We can now go into that directory and have a look at the files there. We can see it's created a basic project outline. The README file contains some information about this project. The package.json file contains any dependencies that your custom plugins might need. We can have a look at that. And this allows us to add any dependencies here on the dependencies section. If we have dependencies, then we can do npm install in this directory, and it will pull in anything that we've added in there. Since we have nothing, npm install does nothing currently. The plugins directory contains your custom plugins which you've written for Haraka. It doesn't contain the core ones. Those are available via Haraka-L. We'll show all of them. We also have a config directory which contains information about how this installation of Haraka runs. The core default config has been copied over for us. What we can now do is have a look at the smtp.ini file, which basically tells us how Haraka binds to the port, what user it runs as, and whether we're running across multiple CPUs, and other information such as that. By default, we bind to port 25, but for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to change that to 2525 so that I don't have to run as root every time I start this up. And now if we look at the config/plugins file, this tells us exactly what plugins Haraka is going to load. By default, Haraka doesn't really do anything unless you actually run plugins. It's merely a framework for SMTP based around running those plugins. So we need to change this to configure exactly what we want Haraka to do. We can see we've got a default list of plugins here. DNSBL runs DNS block lists, such as the SBL or the Spamhaus Zen block list. We have a data.signatures, which allows us to have signatures of strings that we don't want to appear in emails on our server. Hello checks performs checks on the SMTP hello command. Mail from block list allows us to block specific mail froms. Mail from is resolvable, checks that the senders of your email actually have a valid domain. This plugin receipt2 in host list is very important. It allows you to define the hosts for which you receive email. and finally where we queue email to after it's been processed via Haraka. The default setup is queuing to qmail queue, so I'm going to change that and simply have in here test queue. This is a plugin which simply saves each email received by Haraka in the /tmp directory in a file called mail.eml. This is useful for testing. As I said about the receipt to host list, we also need to change the hosts that we are accepting mail from. By default, this pulls in the output of the hostname command, which on this machine is valor.local. I'm going to change that to haraka.test. But if your domain name, for example, is domain.com, you probably want in there domain.com, example.com, and so on. And now we can start Haraka using that setup, using Haraka -c, and then the path to where your configuration is. In this instance, we're in the current directory, so I can just pass in dot. We can see Haraka has loaded a bunch of plugins and registered a bunch of hooks, and is now listening on port 2525. Now, one thing that you probably need to know before doing much with Haraka is how SMTP works. I'm not going to talk very much about that. It's a chatty protocol, but it's actually very easy to learn. There are plenty of resources available on the internet. So now we have Haraka set up and running, we can test sending an email to it. I'm going to change to another window here and run a tool called Swax, which you can Google for and download. It's a simple Perl script, a single file, so it makes it very easy. So we type Swax -h for how we hello. I'm just going to hello as domain.com, -f for who we're sending this from. Let's use my email address, helpme@gmail.com. And -t, we need to use an address here for which we receive mail, so this is matt@haraka.test. And then server is localhost, port is 2525. We press enter, and we can see the conversation that's happening between Swax and the remote end. Here we can see the hello that we used, domain.com, mail from helpme@gmail.com, receipt to matt@haraka.test, the data command, and then the contents of the email that got sent. And finally we got message queued, which means that the message has been accepted. And now if we look at /tmp/mail.eml, we can see the mail that was received there, and it's been stored on disk. And it's had this received line added in here by Haraka saying, hello domain.com, details of who we are, Haraka version 0.5.8 via ESMTP, and the current date. And that is a very basic guide to getting Haraka up and running. What we can do from here, changing back to this window, of course we can see various debug information about what happened. The long string here is a unique ID for each connection, and .1 here for each transaction within that connection, because a single SMTP connection can send multiple emails. So you can track individual emails using this system. If we just stop the server there with Control-C, so what we can do now is have a look at what plugins are available, Haraka -L. These are the global plugins, and we can get help on each individual one of those. So if I want help on how the Early Talker plugin works, I can type Haraka -h Early Talker, and that gives me the markdown documentation for how that plugin works. Now if we want to run that plugin, we add it into the config/plugins file, and configure it for exactly how we want it to work. And that really is a basic introduction to how Haraka works. In the next screencast, I'm going to talk about creating a very simple plugin and get that running within your system so that you can see how Haraka processes commands and how to receive emails and process them in various different ways.